Temporal expansion is a term that I thought of while actually watching the very video that inspired this analysis, a real-time animation of Season 3 animation versus Minecraft. I have never seen something like this before, and especially in animation. Basically, Alan Becker and his team showed us what was actually happening throughout the course of the episode in real time, which moments were overlapping with each other, and what were the other characters doing while something was happening. For example, when all of the Stickmen were transformed into different items, what were they doing while stuck as those items and before Orange could get to them? Or what was happening to Green, who was imprisoned while his other friends were off doing side quests? It's such a new way of looking at the series that I couldn't help but appreciate all of the little details that they put and just how much more animations they had to do to supplement the original episode just to fill the gaps. Okay, but enough gushing. What is temporal expansion? Or rather, what is the concept of time in stories? All shows and stories have a concept of in-universe time, but time isn't the same as events presented. Not always, at least. Sometimes, narratives go back in time just to introduce a new perspective to what's happening. Other times, stories also jump into retrospective flashbacks or prospective future vision. The point is that time in stories is dynamic and usually factors in a lot of missing details that aren't always available to us as a viewer. For example, a reader is never usually able to grasp the length of an arduous journey that allegedly spans over 20 years because of the amount of time skips in between. But just because the author doesn't go into detail of what happens every year, or even every month or hour within that 20 years, doesn't mean that the story is inherently bad. It's usually the audience's responsibility to creatively fill in the gaps in their mind. So, how did Alan Becker do a real time? Well, let's compare the real-time version of the episodes Piglin War and The Witch were their original counterparts. Here we see some cool little details. While Blue was making food, the other characters are just chilling on the couch, much like how we saw them in the original. Orange actually gets 2 drinks and a stack of cookies. And we also see what Red was up to since he was missing when we cut back to them in the original episode. He's been messing around with spawners, and I think those are zombie eggs. And there's an entire fight happening there because Red spawned too many. This could also be the reason why they were so distracted as to not realize Blue was missing. When the Stickman entered the portal, the temporal pacing is pretty much the same as with the original, so these are just 2 scenes put side by side. But in The Witch, we get to see that Blue was trapped and conscious in that piston form for the duration of the episode, leading up to his reveal. When Red became a fish, he tries to get up to land but realizes he can't. I love how he also tries to communicate with the other fish, questionably maybe bonks it with his head and the other fish just tells him to fuck off. Yellow doesn't have much added since he's the first person Orange meets, so their perspectives are relatively in sync. Green is fending for his life as a sugarcane, and I really think he got the short end of this sticks. Having no mobility whatsoever, you see him learn to separate the sugarcanes, raise them up, attempt to split himself to get free, but realize that once the cane is separated, it just becomes inert. He has a full-on panic and tries to claw his way out, but nothing happens. I can go on and on about why this entire video is amazing in its own regard, but we'll be here all day. The point is that this is a great example of temporal pacing and storytelling because it really shows you how coherent the timeline is. Because the story has such a good handle on its event consistencies, the flow of the actual episode is coherent even if you remove all of this extra stuff. Blue reassures the others that he's alive, and he's just doing something so he's given himself extra time to move inconspicuously. If he didn't do this action, there's the middle ground of why didn't the Stickman notice that Blue was missing for such a long time? Characters logically get to point A to point B in the time they needed. The opposite of that is also true. Because the original episode is paced very well, putting extra details in the middle to expand upon certain actions feels natural. Expanding the whens of your story can make the flow feel smoother and make your audiences reconsider not just what a character did, but why they did it and how they got here. If you pace a story too fast, payoffs and wins can feel unearned. If you pace it too slow, then it can feel unrealistic, especially if it's supposed to be a high-stakes story. Always have in the back of your mind what everyone else besides your main character is doing at the particular time. Good temporal pacing, not just the pacing of a video or the writing, can also make the world feel realer. Introducing different perspectives on an event can also show different characterizations. Also, Can I just say that this is one of the most impressive things that I've seen in animated storytelling? To not only animate new scenes without any cuts in such a way that it fits with the original, but also fill in all of the gaps between cuts and line them up together to seamlessly transition with each other is such a testimony to how much attention to detail this series has. Speaking of details, temporal focuses on when will it happen, Chekhov's gun focuses on what should happen. The Chekhov's gun principle suggests that every element introduced and was given sufficient attention to should be relevant and serve a purpose later in the narrative. It's a gun because he used the following example. If a gun is shown hanging on the wall in Act 1 of a play, it must later be shot in a future act. The Chekhov's gun states that every detail included in a plot should be meaningful, and at the very least, have a reason for its introduction. The ultimate goal of it is payoff. And also to advise authors to limit the narrative elements they use that they aren't confident would be fruitful in the end. The entire point of Chekhov's gun is narrative buildup, payoff, and narrative significance. And that's where I think Alan Becker's stories shine. Significant elements throughout the seasons are almost always expanded upon in future ones, beginning from details that might feel one-off to entire core plot points. Of course, not everything has to be a Chekhov's gun. That would be mildly insane, but it's always nice to go back to core plot and character points, then flesh them out in future iterations or expand on them. Here are just some neat examples of the Chekhov's gun application throughout the series. Now, be warned, the Chekhov's gun principle is meant to have leverage, and it's more of a guideline than anything with real criteria that defines its usage, so there are more or less varying applications. The first one, though, is more character-centric. In the episode The Ultimate Minecart Race, we get a snapshot of the Stickman preparing for a minecart race designed by Yellow, and we get the idea of all of their game plans by looking at their toolbars. All of the Stickmen have multiple minecarts, which they use in the opening sequence. Though not all of these items will be used, it is cool to see them prepare and use what's being shown here. And what they're preparing in this particular instance are their trump cards. Red has the golden carrot, a boat, and the horse spawn eggs that he will use in his fight against Blue. Blue has the enhanced potion of swiftness and the eventual boat that he'll use to chase Red down with. Green has the trident that he will use to spin with, and his trusted fishing rod that he uses to take down Orange multiple times. And Orange has his TNT and the shield that he'll use to propel himself over the chasm. It's also really cool that the bars are animated to stay consistent even with the new items they crafted off screen. For a more conceptual application, here's another one. In the parkour episode, the gun is in the command blocks and the concept that they can't die. However, this concept becomes very relevant and even weaponized when the Stickmen are all separated, and it's revealed that Purple purposefully made them unable to commit the Sayori and escape that way. Now, this is me filling in some blanks, but it's possible that Purple is aware that the Stickmen, if killed, have a chance of just respawning. In the same episode, we actually get the reveal that King Orange has a copy of the actual YouTube episode of the Animation vs. Minecraft as if it were done in an animation. It's not like he's accessing memories, but rather he's accessing the actual Alan Becker channel. In the same vein, this is also the first time that we got confirmation that Alan Becker and the Alan Becker channel exist within the Stickman universe, and since their goal is a Minecraft game icon, they can't risk the Stickmen respawning back in their computer world to defend the block, so perpetually keeping them in motion is essential. Plus, maybe just the idea of not wanting to kill people that you once considered friends anyway. But the Chekhov's gun application doesn't have to be in such minute details. It's meant for the bigger things and descriptions too. Imagine if Blue saw Purple in the Nether episode and the entire thing just ends without even addressing the idea that there is a literal Stickman that's not them. Or how Herobrine in this universe does exist, and it would be a waste if we didn't see a big fight with him. The ending of it all is that if your story introduces an important and especially powerful concept, person, or item, never take it for granted or forget about it. Always make sure to be mindful of the information you give to your audience, or else you'll get people like me that accidentally overanalyze them. And if Chekhov's gun focuses on what's supposed to happen, world building focuses on where it's going to happen. World building is the most pivotal part of any good storytelling, because it establishes the consistency and logic within the setting that the narrative is built upon. Good world building shows the readers the laws and rules, and even the places and expansions that inhabitants must abide by and do live in. And shifting those rules arbitrarily can create plot holes down the line. Of course, you have to make sacrifices here and there for practical reasons, such as the Stickman no longer using any diamond armor because it was too much of a hassle to animate. Regardless, world building provides the framework of logic, and if your world can't observe its own predetermined laws of physics, mathematics, or even relevant concepts, then your story will feel much smaller. The world building of the Stickman universe is one of the most expansive elements in its story because what once started off as just Stickman trapped in Alan's PC and having cool items turned to them moving along literal universes of different kinds. One is a monster school, the other is a peaceful musical, and hopefully we get Stickman in 2B2T. Now, I might revisit this specific point again if I ever tackle the beauty that is animation versus animator, because it's also its own narrative masterpiece. But for now, I want to focus on the concepts introduced and reinforced in animation versus Minecraft. You'll see what I mean later. Let's start with the Minecraft world of Stickman. Alan Becker expands upon Minecraft's existing logic by using the Stickman as a very creative mechanical expansion. The Stickmen essentially act as player characters and can respawn when they're killed. They can respawn either to a nearby bed or to their original home, which could have dampened the stakes of their escapades, but surprisingly doesn't. Because they can't always legally die, their adversaries usually transcend death, which I think is a really good subversion, but still keeps the stakes high. This can either be through imprisonment, the process of dying being more painful, and literal data erasure into oblivion. Also, items, when used by the Stickmen, are used in ways that they're normally not supposed to be used, but still make sense within the item's context. For example, is how Green usually uses the fishing rod as a grappling hook, or how they're able to throw swords, or how their fighting mechanics are much more dynamic. You can see an absolute contrast when a player character uses them. The Stickmen are also liberal with their crafting compared to everyone else, able to make items creatively and bend the rules by a lot. What I love is that while this is cartoon logic, they still show these items being chopped or split or being interacted with on their fundamental levels, breaking them into their core components, but still respecting the process of crafting. But Alan doesn't just focus on the Stickman's relationship to Minecraft, but also Minecraft's relationship with the Stickmen. It gave one of them an addiction, but regardless. The mobs are as equally alive as the Stickmen and serve important narrative purposes instead of just being accessories. The fight scenes also reimagine the mobs' usual fighting styles to create dynamic fight scenes that let the mobs bounce off of each other. He also gives live cities mobs and makes them equally compelling characters that can aid or hinder the plot. Alan also isn't opposed to adding his own lore that's not canon to Minecraft, which was the case for the episode Lucky Block, where Yellow gets transported into a strange world inside the Lucky Block. He finds a new dimension and a strange power that's able to spew out custom but random items. Another consistent character is Red's pig that I think is called Reuben, but don't quote me on this. Actually, it's never confirmed if they're the same pig consistently. Red's just really good with mobs. We also see how some mobs interact with the Stickmen and redefine their interpersonal relationships. Friendly mobs are eager to help the Stickmen in their journey, but hostile mobs have both implicit disdain for the Stickmen, just like how the students of Monster School bullied Red, or just straight up attack him. Most likely because the Stickmen, for all intents and purposes, are player characters. But redemption and the usual friendship is magic with a lot of fighting are still possible on rewriting that logic. The world of Minecraft feels equally familiar and novel because its interpretation in this series is reimagined in such a way that it takes what we already know and recontextualizes it. But then we move on to the Stickman world. The Stickman world is much more prevalent in the channel's sister series, Animation vs. Animator. It's revealed that there exists a completely new, three-dimensional world filled exclusively with colored Stickmen. In this world, we know that the internet exists, as well as modern media we have like YouTube and video games. Now, this has a lot more implications than first glance. A lot of really cool implications. Alan Becker is essentially a god in the eyes of the Stickman, and the videos on his channel are the same as nigh omnipotence. Not only does he showcase the Stickman's everyday antics, but also has introspections into their personal thoughts and backstories that would have been otherwise private. All of these episodes, allegedly, are canon in its own universe, because its creator is canon in the universe. This could have easily just been an Easter egg, but it actually ties into a lot of the main plot of its sister series and cements the weird cosmology of the Stickman universe. This also gives the implication that a lot of the personal episodes can be viewed by the Stickman in this universe. Great worldbuilding can reinvent how you see a character, as well as explain their place in the setting of the story. And if your world is alive and you show that it's alive, so is the love of the audience for your story. Understanding the flow, the right amount of details, and the whys and the whens is crucial in showing your audience something compelling. But that's still incomplete. Stories can't function without the pivotal actors. Movement can't happen without characters and relationships. But that's a story for another day. I'm Mushi, let's talk about it next time.